Next question, please.
Sure. Hi, my name is Ian Woodall, and I'm with Transport Canada Vehicle Programs. We pretty much test everything from hydrogen to PHEV, and one of the reasons I'm standing here is because I heard you talking about idle start-stop systems, and this happens to be an area of my research. So I just wanted to follow up that you're right with the price that, while I can't name any vehicle manufacturers specifically due to confidentiality rights, obviously about $700 to about $1,000 seems to be the area for these systems. We've tested a few of these vehicles, and we're averaging about a 10% savings in the city with idle start stop. And the system usually engages either by releasing the clutch or the releasing the brake pedal. You are right about the heating and actually the air conditioning too. It does disengage, but we haven't noticed any passenger discomfort under 4 minutes. So it seems to be that for most city stops, this seems to be fine. So I just wanted to follow up on that since there's a bit of discussion there.
Well, I'm glad you spoke up and that you're on board with this one. It's very exciting.
Well, actually, one of the areas that seems to be an issue with the manufacturers is that, as you might be aware, we have federal test procedures that determine your fuel consumption values for your vehicles. And unfortunately, the cycles don't really show the true benefit of the technology because a certain portion is only in the city and highway, and you really don't see this part of the cycle in the city portion. And unfortunately, obviously, the manufacturer wants to bring in a technology, but they want to see a benefit from their end. Ultimately, on the windows of the manufacturer, the purchaser can purchase this vehicle. So this is another policy thing that we're looking at right now with a bunch of manufacturers.
You just highlighted an area of one of the benefits of hybrids that we haven't been talking about because we're talking about gas guzzlers and fuel sippers, but in fact, as was mentioned in yesterday's presentation by the presenter for Pike Research, was in fact that it has to be more than just fuel economy that we're talking about. There has to be other things, and of course there's the quality of life that comes along with if you're going to sit in a school zone waiting for your kids to come up from school, best you don't be having your engine running there, for example. It sets a bad example, and in fact it pollutes the air as well and consumes the resources. So kids get it like that, and I think the rest of us take a little while.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, just with the idle start-stop systems, obviously they have their limits, but we're noticing that gasoline engines can go down to about -7, and even diesels are working around 3 to 5 degrees Celsius. So it can't work for probably all of Canada all the time throughout the year, but for a good portion for most of the year.
Good, thanks for your question. Brad.
Hi, I'm Brad Berman with Auto Future Tech. As Jay indicated, even the rosiest predictions of new electric vehicles coming to market still will not penetrate to any kind of great degree. And yet, the major global auto manufacturers are starting to produce these cars. So it's not going to happen fast enough. But I guess what I was wondering is, even though there's a huge opportunity there, because there's so many cars already out that could benefit from the improved technology, what would it take to develop really almost from scratch an industry to convert versus an established industry an established auto industry, albeit at a slow pace, is starting to put out the cars? I mean, isn't that maybe in the long run more feasible than developing a conversion industry from scratch and at the same time trying to incentivize in these blunt fashions the adoption of those vehicles when they have to basically compete against converted vehicles, that have all kinds of problems because, potential problems because they've already been on the road, where I think consumers would more rapidly adopt something that was fresh from the showroom.
Yeah, that was a very large question.
In 5 words or less.
Okay. Go plug in. No, you see I'm a little bit biased. Obviously there's going to be a need for both. And my personal opinion is that there are a ton of stealth mode conversion type companies who are focusing on solutions for what we call the aftermarket. We try to avoid the word conversion because it really implies this, do-it-yourself kit kind of thing. Wow, my voice just got loud. And it's a conversion itself by nature really kind of says that everybody at home should be able to do it on their own, and that just throws all automotive standards and safety and all that kind of thing right out the window. So the companies that come to market, and I know of several that are just appearing now that have been working hard for a few years, are going to bring really great technology that maintains all the federal motor vehicle safety standards and maintains the integrity of the vehicle, and hopefully will work with provincial, federal, state levels of government like the Department of Transportation and all that to adhere to and create standards for that aftermarket. And while at the same time, that really, I believe, is what's going to cause the tipping point for the major OEMs to bring more electric vehicles to market quicker. It's always the niche companies that show there's a market that the big players are just ignoring because they have to spend $1 billion to make a vehicle. They have to make 50,000 a year to break even.
So you see them more as a catalyst rather than reaching scale?
I think both will happen. I think there'll be a catalyst and it will be a viable market for 20, 30, 40 years.
Thanks. We have the next question.
Yes, I'm Al Cormier from Electric Mobility Canada. And as many of you know, we've done a roadmap for electric vehicles in Canada, technology roadmap. In there, we project a vision of 500,000 electric vehicles, plug-in electric vehicles on the road by 2018. And developing that number, which was done, with a lot of debate and discussion with OEMs and governments and various industries, and some of you were involved in these discussions, clearly there was a need in there for conversions as well, because without the conversions, we certainly will not achieve that target. And as Jay said earlier, we need the conversions to really accelerate the growth of EVs. One of the advantages of conversions that we see is that you can disperse jobs in the auto industry into various regions of the country. Right now, all the auto assembly in Canada is done in Ontario, but conversions can be done in virtually any small town. And of course, the issue that was made as well is that we need uniform regulations province by province so this can be done and the vehicles can travel interprovincially and be licensed interprovincially. And that's a provincial responsibility. They have to do that, and hopefully BC and Ontario may take a lead in that. But I had a question of the professor about his research, and I make sure I understand your research correctly, that an incentive for conversions would have more benefit than an incentive for a new vehicle. Were you saying because it's a real conscious effort to have your vehicle converted? So.
Well, for one thing, I wasn't saying that. I was speculating that seems more likely. But the reason is, and I wouldn't say that unless we could actually have some data to show who adopts this technology, et cetera. But the reason it might be more likely is the aftermarket conversions essentially reduce, as we say, the marginal cost of driving the extra mile. And therefore, it provides the biggest benefit and the biggest cost savings to those who drive the most or those who emit the most, or both. Because if there's a fixed cost of retrofitting a vehicle or aftermarket conversion, that's not going to be people who don't drive a whole lot or people whose cars are relatively fuel efficient aren't going to pursue the technology. And so you do actually manage to get the people who would benefit the most from this policy actually adopting it. So that's the only reason I would say that it's that's more likely to succeed. The one thing, I guess, on the aftermarket conversions, it's an interesting point you made about the actual aftermarket conversions can be done anywhere. They don't have to be done in Ontario or in Michigan for that matter. That's true, although I think there's been some research which actually shows that it's considerably more costly, both in a monetary sense and costly in the sense of convincing consumers to go in, take their vehicles in, and get the aftermarket conversion, compared with doing it right there in the factory while the vehicle is being rolled out. So, for example, the FFV example that I used, it's actually just costs $100 apparently to the manufacturer to make the vehicle an FFV. Now, again, that's not the best technology available because we really shouldn't be subsidizing or using E85, but that's a different issue. So just going back to the point, there's a cost to actually getting the aftermarket done elsewhere. But the advantage is we do target those people who already have their cars and who aren't going to buy new cars anytime soon. So the 800 million cars that are on the roads right now.
Of course, there's a big difference between the cost of creating an FFV vehicle at a factory than an electric vehicle. Yeah.
Right, absolutely, absolutely.
And I think, I forget who it was in the States, was it Plug in America, said that if you converted the US fleets at 5% per year, they would create more jobs than now exists in the auto industry.
Wow. Yeah.
I'd like to also say on the subject of incentives, you know, there's, from a fleet point of view, you know, take one utility in Ohio that has 12,000 F-150s. 12,000 F-150s. I don't know what their millions of dollars in fuel costs are per month, but eliminating that cost has got to be far better incentive than any government incentive that could ever come.
Right.
Not to say they shouldn't, but you know, eliminating fuel costs is a big.
Right, and in fact, also, actually going back to the fleet question as well, presumably the aftermarket conversion companies such as yours would be able to negotiate much better deals for big fleets and big firms like that that have so many cars, which would work out best in both cases for the supplier and on the demand side, compared with an individual consumer just going in and retrofitting their vehicle. So that's another reason why you actually want to target the fleets first, I would argue. But yeah.
And think about the utility companies who are importers of electricity to their region. And if they have 10,000 electric vehicles at 35 kilowatt hours per vehicle, I don't know what the math is there. It's 35 megawatts, 350 megawatts of power they can store. They can become net exporters of electricity instead of net importers. So it just changes the game completely when you start adding that kind of energy storage to the grid. Yeah, the scrapper program was tough. In the U.S., they called it cash for clunkers. Right. And it was so successful in getting people out of their old cars and into new ones that they did it twice. And
well, it was successful. The Cash for Clunkers was a very thinly disguised stimulus program. I mean, they claimed it was an environmental program. But
getting people to buy more cars.
Right.
Yeah.
But the actual impact of the environment was just, you were getting people to get rid of their older cars 6 months before they would otherwise, or a year before. And so in the long run, there was really no fuel savings.
Actually, it was much worse because it got people who weren't driving their V8s very often because it was so expensive to drive them, and guilt and all that, into 4 cylinders. And they literally drove so much more that the net result of emissions output was higher.
Yeah.
So, what do you do, right?
Yeah. Well, they
didn't see that one coming.
The unintended consequences of all of these incentive programs. So, for example, one thing we worried about in our research was, yes, you make hybrid cars cheaper, so presumably people buy more of them. But does it mean, therefore, that they drive more? Because now, on the margin, it's cheaper to drive the extra mile than before. And if that's the case, then conceivably, it's possible that programs like this might actually increase carbon consumption and increase the effect on the environment. We actually, we estimated this, we were pretty careful about this, and the answer is no, but you do have to worry about things like this. A lot of these programs can just go the wrong way. So.
It's why, I keep coming back to the problem. The problem fundamentally is an engine that consumes gasoline.
When you say, when you convert your Escape into electric, and you had your number saving about $200 a month on operating costs, how long does that take to get your return on investment of converting it?
Well, in significantly low volumes that are so low that the car companies would never even think about it, it's about 4 or 5 years. And that makes a couple of assumptions, like 11,000 miles of driving per year and fuel prices increasing over the next 10 years at the same rate that they did in the last 10 years. So we used those last 10 years of data to assume, and we just projected that out. And we projected electricity costs included. You've got to pay a few $100s a year in electricity to do those 11,000 miles and those kinds of things. So 4 or 5 years. And if you scale it above 1,000 vehicle units of putting this drive system into a gas car, it's significantly better. You can save an additional $15,000 or another $150 a month. So the consumers, do we change our oil every 6,000 miles like we're supposed to? Probably not. Do we change our engines every 5 years? Absolutely not. We actually sell our cars every 5 years statistically. But fleets, 2 engine replacements, a transmission replacements, they do every single oil change, twice as often as they're supposed to, because they're trying to keep the residual value in that vehicle and make it run for as long as possible, because they're spending tax dollars. So they need to not buy capital purchases as so often. So the economic benefit to them and the elimination of tailpipe emissions just makes really good sense as using the fleets as the catalyst, as we talked about earlier.
Thank you very much for staying through to the very last session of Globe, and thank you very much to our panel members for their great presentations.